Welcome to the Abide Project Synod 2023 update. It is Thursday, late afternoon. Cedric. I'm Reverend Tyler Wagonmaker, by the way.
And I am the Reverend Cedric Parcells.
And we are at an undisclosed location, I think you could say. But we're in the Grand Rapids East area, not that far from the campus of Calvin University, where Synod was meeting, and now Synod has finished up, and now delegates are on their way to family and friends, either in the area or heading back home on flights.
My goodness,
this was quite a day.
It was
Cedric.
Yes, it was
a bit exhausting in many ways, and yet, well, we'll talk about that.
Yes,
it started the regular time.
Yep,
and
the worship service,
after the worship, and that which was on the docket today was really to deal with everything that came out of Committee 8.
Yes,
which started with their first report dealing with the appeal from Nealon Avenue, appealing what Synod 2022 last year had decided in regards to them.
Yes.
And so what was the crux of what Synod decided in regards to that appeal?
Well, Synod decided in an overwhelming majority, I think it's fair to say, 72%.
72%.
72%.
Huge. That's even just let that kind of sink in a little bit, because that was about the percentages of last year.
They were,
Cedric,
yeah.
And so which again demonstrates that this is not an aberration this year from last year in terms of the direction of the denomination.
You know, we started off these videos in Byron Center at that train station.
Oh, yes.
And we were talking about how Synod 2022 got us going down the track, and we're continuing to move down that track. I think that's the clear indication of what Synod has been doing this last week.
And with that destination. And so they dealt over a period of a couple hours of a lot of conversation that was allowed on the floor.
Yes.
And those on the one side and the Nealon Avenue side said, let us do ministry in our own context, kind of individually. Don't have the broader church tell a local church how to do ministry. And then the other side was saying, well, that's in many ways part of what it means to be the church, is that we don't just do ministry unto ourselves. We do it broadly. We've covenanted together what even ministry looks like. What is the message of ministry overall?
Yeah.
And so Synod said, Nealon, you're not an island unto yourself. You have made covenant with the Christian Reformed Church.
And you've broken covenant.
And we're calling you back to that, again.
And I think, the local committee also admonished Classis Grand Rapids East that they had not followed through on their responsibilities to us as a denomination.
And so the committee, again, they did not sustain Nealon Avenue's appeal.
Nope.
Which then moved on to the in-local committee. As you speak about the local committee, that was the next report from Committee 8. And they came with two major recommendations. The first recommendation was approved, by the body of Synod, to say essentially what Synod 2022 said.
Yes.
Was, here's our decision, here's where the denomination is covenanted together, this is the confessional position. Nealon Avenue,
you're in violation of it.
You're in violation of it. You need to come into line with the denomination.
Yes.
We're calling you to do that. Yes. And not only Nealon Avenue, Classis Grand Rapids East.
And Classis, yes. And so
we're calling you to that as well.
Calling them to basically say, all right, you said that you were waiting for the appeal to be decided. The appeal has been decided now. And now the denomination is going to be watching. Is Classis Grand Rapids East going to follow through on its responsibility and keep covenant with the rest of the denomination, or is Synod 2024 going to have to come back next year? We hope they don't. We hope that Classis Grand Rapids East follows through.
Yes, and that was stated oftentimes on the floor, that we do not want to drive out a church.
No.
The appeal constantly is to say, join us again. You've broken covenant. We're calling to you. Come back to us.
Yeah.
And Classis Grand Rapids East, help them come back, fulfill your obligation, your duty to live into that. Yeah. That was the first recommendation. The second,
I should also point out that on the floor there was conversation about this, and so encouraging the churches to be sort of investigative of what is Classis Grand Rapids East doing? And if we feel like they're not doing what they ought to be doing, to write overtures.
Yes.
To Synod 2024.
Well, and that came up, especially on the second recommendation. The first one passed. The second one, which was to set up a new and local committee, that one failed. But part of that conversation was to say we've already corrected Classis Grand Rapids East. We've called Neal and Avenue back into line again, and now churches. You have within your right, again, the opportunity, even the responsibility to see if that's happening. Is Classis Grand Rapids East going to live into that, the responsibility or not? And you can bring this up to Synod 2024. And because that's part of what it means to covenant together, is they've committed and we've committed to work with them and to encourage them and to hold them accountable to that. And in this particular instance, as we hold each other accountable in a lot of different ways, a lot of different issues, this Classis sees. This just happens to be this issue. That's right before the denomination.
But they didn't just talk about this in local committee with regard to Classis Grand Rapids East. They also decided that they were going to send instruct all the classes. This was another decision they made. Instruct all classes to call into or to guide into compliance those churches in our denomination who have publicly rejected the biblical guidelines. And so, in the same way that we've been encouraged to watch what Classis Grand Rapids East does, we've also been encouraged to look at these other classes in the denomination and to see, okay, are we going to keep covenant together as a denomination, or what?
And so Synod has instructed them to guide into compliance those office bearers of those churches who reject the biblical guidelines. So it's not even it'd be nice if you did that.
Which is, and I think it's clear, it's important to say, and going back to what happened yesterday, is to say this is no longer simply, it's clear now that the confessional position of the Christian Reformed Church is that homosexual sex is unchastity, according to the Heidelberg Catechism. So this is a confessional matter. That I sort of feel like we put that to bed at this synod.
There was definitively decided, and without question. And in fact, those from Neal and Avenue and Classis Grand Rapids East and others said we feel very much a small minority now in our position, and because they asked for the vote total, actually.
They did.
And the body said, let's give them the vote total. And so they found out, in many ways, just how I guess small in terms of where they stand in regards to the rest of the denomination in terms of an opinion on this issue. And so the church has spoken into that again.
One other thing that was decided today that got done was, it always takes 2 years to change the church order, the actual text of the church order. And so last year proposed to this year's synod that we amend the church order so that those classes that have a hard time finding deacons in particular, because that's the reality, to finding deacons to send to synod, they can now send an additional elder delegate or an additional minister delegate, I guess?
Well, you can only have at most 2 officers in any one delegation. So the most they can send is 2 ministers or 2 elders or 2 deacons.
And that was something that was, we missed. There were many voices from some of these classes that weren't there because they couldn't meet the requirement of sending a full delegation. So, a lot of these things,
So this was a positive change because now it's broadened again the voices that are, and especially some of those were brought up from some of the ethnic minority congregations that struggle to find enough delegates. And so now we've actually increased through this the ability for the ethnic minority congregations to be able to speak onto the floor of synod, future synods. So
those are the things that we got done. All right, we didn't get done. Synod got done.
Yes, you're right.
But there are a few things that synod did not get done, Tyler.
I know,
we did not. We can talk about Gravamina and the overture with disaffiliation.
That wasn't that kind of like the thing for this synod.
This was the main, one of the main, if not the main topic was what do we do with Gravamina?
Yes.
And we didn't get to that.
Why didn't we get to it, Cedric?
I'm not sure. What do you think, Tyler?
Since you asked me what I think, Cedric, there was not good planning by the officers of synod this year. And principally, again, the president sets the pace.
Yeah, the buck stops at the president's desk.
Because he sets the pace, and so we were at Synod the entire week. Much we sat in from beginning to end, and it felt in many ways as if the schedule was just like a normal, average to light sort of agenda, sort of Synod. Let's fit all the different events in, and no urgency, no sense of we have some really important conversations that need to be had, 2-hour dinner times, all those sorts of things, which are nice if
long stories that had nothing to do with the recommendations being considered.
Well, there were a lot of delegates who
practically no time limit.
No time, practically. I mean, there was 3 minutes ish, but some of the very same voices kept getting up time after time after time. Almost like they were filibustering. And I know they weren't, but it felt like that because they were up so often. And so there was a lot of conversation about a lot of other things which are important to talk about. And rather than paring down some of the things that could have been, maybe agency reports that could have been maybe put off to another year. We do that in classes meetings all the time. But instead, there was such a time crunch that on probably the biggest issue, dealing with gravamen, what it means to be, living into being confessional, do you take exceptions to that or not? Maybe an hour was given to that. So much so that they had to almost cease debate. Now, the floor of Synod agreed with that, but we saw some delegates protest and walk off the floor and say, I'm no longer part of Synod anymore. I'm unseating myself because I have lost confidence in this body. And it wasn't just one side, even though the Orthodox side didn't walk off the floor, of course. But we've heard throughout the week. Kind of wonderings, encouragements. Why doesn't the chair change things? Why doesn't he tighten it up? We have so much to do, and it feels like we're not going to have time to do it.
Numerous requests throughout the weekend, Monday and Tuesday. Numerous requests. Let's go back to using the clock. Let's try and manage our time. No. We've got it under control. And then today, at the end of the day, it really did feel that they had lost control.
Oh, it felt like, I think they had lost control because delegates, I've never seen all these delegates walk off the floor and protest. One was in tears pleading, saying there's not time to talk about something which is substantial. And she was right. These are incredibly important conversations to be had, and there simply wasn't time about the issue. And that goes back to Cedric, it goes back to time management by the officers. They have to manage that time. And I think probably the biggest failing of the week was an inability to do that well.
Yes. And after Synod was over and I was talking to some of the delegates, it's always a very emotional time.
It is.
When you get out of there. And some of the delegates, they were talking to me and they said, we just feel that we began to wonder, they said, we began to wonder and feel whether or not the president of Synod wasn't intentionally trying to impede progress. And I don't think that's probably what Paul was trying to accomplish, but that's how it felt.
That's how it felt to them.
Felt to many of the delegates that there was almost an intentional attempt to impede progress, and that's not good. I mean, if anything, this Synod showed over the last couple of days that we are a very divided denomination, and not managing important meetings like this well can only further that division and suspicion and lack of trust that already exists.
Oh yes, and it was really tragic how at the very end, even they had to quick rush in a ballot vote at the end, which had been tabled for another decision, which they didn't even make. And then so one of the delegates said, I have an issue with one of the the names on there, and the chair said, nope, I'm going to rule it out of order, even though early at the start of Synod saying, you do this, we need to talk about this, go into executive session. They simply ran out of time. And they said, we have to do these ballots, let's just push it through. That is not a good way.
It was a mess.
It was such a mess, and that was especially with so many wonderful high points in Synod. Also, too, with some of the decisions that were made, it was really disappointing to end that way. Now, what was decided by these committees, the work that wasn't done, the officers decided they would take all their work and they will send it as a communication to next year's Synod,
Right,
Synod
so-
2024.
So all the stuff they had done on Gravamina,
Yes.
and on the overture for Moline CRC with regard to disaffiliation, they said, you know what, we do need to give this more time for various and sundry reasons we don't have to go into anymore.
That's right.
And we will send that off to Synod 24. And so, you know what, the good news is, Tyler, is that, you know, Synod 24, if the Lord should tarry, is going to come around, and so we will continue on. We'll continue on, and the train will continue to keep going down the tracks.
It will. And the Abide Project will continue to talk about this. In fact, speaking about continuing on in the Abide Project, I know that there is, I don't know what the official title is. It a convention?
Well, last year we
churches,
called it the Convention of Confessing Churches, didn't we?
Something like that. Anyway,
we're not in charge of the name.
We are not. We're not in charge really much of anything, actually.
That's true.
So they
Yeah.
just let us have a camera.
That's right,
sometimes.
exactly.
But it will be meeting in the Chicagoland area.
Chicagoland area. And August 3rd and 4th in the Chicagoland area.
Yes.
And you can find more details about that online at theabideproject.org. You know, one last thing is, you know, when you get to the end of the Synod, and things don't turn out exactly how you'd like, you can walk out sort of feeling somewhat defeated, right, and defeatist. And you know, I think what's really important is to get together with brothers and to talk it out, and to really realize, actually, you know what, we accomplished a lot at this Synod. A lot was accomplished, and a lot of good stuff, moving the Christian Reformed Church further towards becoming a true confessional Reformed church, not only in word, but also in practice.
Yes, I mean, with the work of sisters and brothers, just kind of pushing that and encouraging that, praying that through. There's so many have been praying of these sisters and brothers in the faith about Synod, and the work that will continue on is really important. And there were a lot of good things that were accomplished that encourages us, the denomination holding firm and continuing to go forward in that direction. We have a lot to be thankful for.
We do.
And to be hopeful for, continue to be tremendously hopeful in the Christian Reformed Church.
And you know what? We can get together in Chicagoland in August, 3rd and 4th, and we can encourage one another and prepare one another for another year.
Until then,